Hello.
It's hello.
Hello. Hello?
Hello there.
Welcome back to the Space School. Today we'll find out what would have happened had General Grievous killed the Chosen One. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else part of my team. Want a chance to win in our next giveaway? Watch to the end of the video, and I'll tell you exactly how you can win. Our story begins over the Battle of Seleucami. This was a Jedi mission to rescue Jedi Council member Eth Koth. He was captured by General Grievous, and currently Jedi Masters Obi-Wan Kenobi, Adi Gallia, and Anakin Skywalker were en route to save the Jedi Master from the clutches of evil. Currently, Obi-Wan was running a diversion to keep General Grievous away from Skywalker and Gallia, while they saved Eth Koth. General Grievous knew the game that Obi-Wan was playing. The moment Kenobi's Arquentans docked at Grievous's Resurgent-class destroyer, he had him trapped. Instead of falling for Kenobi's trap, Grievous sent down 3 squadrons of commando droids, along with hundreds of battle droids. His entire plan was to trap Kenobi on the ship, while awaiting for Gallia and Skywalker to arrive on the bridge so that he could deal with them himself. Grievous was under strict orders not to engage Skywalker by Count Dooku, but he didn't really care. A Jedi was a Jedi, and that's all he needed to know, and all he had to say about it. Grievous didn't care what Sidious thought. It was Anakin who was boarding his ship, falling into his trap. While the Republic fleet was bearing down on his fleet, Grievous was confident in his own fleet holding. There were 2 important factors to note here. General Grievous didn't know either of which. First, he was requested to avoid Skywalker because of a much greater Sith plan he didn't know about. On the other hand, Grievous had no knowledge of Anakin's plan to board the ship. It was just an assumption, because wherever you find Kenobi, Skywalker was never far behind. With this assumption, Grievous awaited on the bridge with numerous Magna Guards. It was a trap. There was no denying it. And as much as Eth Koth tried to make Grievous believe it wasn't a trap and that the Jedi wouldn't come for him, he would be sorely mistaken. As the battle over Seleucami intensified, General Kenobi struggled to get a push into the Separatist flagship. Adi Gallia and Anakin were able to get on board the ship. The only issue is that the communications were shut off. They couldn't get into contact with Kenobi or Admiral Yularen. The Jedi made their way through the ship, trailed by a group of clone troopers. As they got closer to the bridge, they cut down battle droids before Anakin and Adi Gallia stormed into the bridge. When they walked in, they saw General Grievous. Eth Koth tried to warn the Jedi, but before he could utter a word, General Grievous ignited a lightsaber into his back, killing him instantaneously. Anakin looked at Adi Gallia and then back to Grievous, telling him that that was a big mistake. Before Adi and Anakin could ignite their lightsabers, Magna Guards jumped up from around the corner, igniting their plasma stabs. Anakin and Gallia ignited their weapons as Rex and his men turned their weapons on the Magna Guards. Skywalker lunged forward towards Grievous, but one of the Magna Guards stopped him in his tracks. Grievous watched all of Adi Gallia's and Anakin's moves, trying to understand everything he could about what they were doing before facing them. Grievous's cybernetics allowed him to use the lightsaber techniques from opposing Jedi against them, having had all that programmed into his mind, so he could easily beat them whenever he encountered them. It's exactly how Grievous was such a monster when he faced most Jedi. Regardless, Grievous paced around like a primal hunter, waiting for his opportunity to strike down the Jedi. Anakin swung back and forth between Magna Guards before he was able to encounter General Grievous. Adi Gallia, on the other hand, was holding her own against the Magna Guards. The clones were trying, but Rex and the other clones slowly got cut down as the Magna Guards surrounded Adi Gallia. Anakin was a great duelist, but as he began his aggressive assault on the droid general, the sooner he realized he was way in over his head. Grievous had 2 blades out and responded equally as aggressive to Anakin. The 2 of them were an intense brawl for domination, and as soon as Skywalker felt advantage, he lost it. On the other hand, Adi Gallia was bested by the Magna Guards who were beating down on her. Anakin noticed it and shock filled his eyes. Anakin then was kicked in the chest and thrown from his feet into the barrier next to him. Anakin looked up. Grievous was bearing down on him. Anakin looked to his right and saw Adi Gallia. She was dead. All of his men and Rex were dead too. Eth Koth, he was dormant, stuck in a motionless death. Anakin reached out with the Force and pulled Adi Gallia's lightsaber and ignited it in his hand as he twirled around and attacked Grievous. The 2 of them struck at each other, both of them using their overly aggressive form to their advantage. Anakin was at a disadvantage because the Magna Guards behind him were striking at him, and he had to defend himself from them. Skywalker whipped his blade around and then parried back and forth. Grievous was impressed with Skywalker, but before Skywalker could grab any advantage, Grievous ignited his third and fourth lightsaber. When he did that, the door shot open, and the Magna Guards, Grievous, and Skywalker all turned. It was Kenobi and Cody with all their men. Anakin smiled when he saw his master. Obi-Wan leapt forward, swinging at the Magna Guards, as Cody and the 212th fired at the droids and covered where Kenobi could not. Grievous whipped his blades around, spinning around like a windmill. His blades were too quick. Adi's blade was ripped apart out of Anakin's hand. Anakin swung his blade around, trying to hold himself together, and before he could seize any amount of positioning, he was cut across the chest. Anakin looked at Grievous before falling to his knees and rolling to the ground. Obi-Wan saw this out of the corner of his eyes. He was in a momentary state of shock before he dodged a Magna Guard strike. Obi-Wan tried his hardest to hold himself together, swinging and parrying, cutting down the droids as he made his way towards Grievous. Kenobi ordered out to Cody to lock down the bridge. Obi-Wan looked down at Anakin. He was still alive. Obi-Wan looked back up to Grievous, who laughed maniacally at him. Obi-Wan clashed with Grievous over the body of Adi Gallia. Cody's men spread out around the bridge, shooting down the droids and taking over the controls, still making sure that Grievous had no room to escape. The doors were completely sealed. The only way that Grievous would be able to get out was with his lightsabers, cutting a hole in the wall. Grievous struck at Kenobi, who used his precision with a lightsaber to block every strike that came at him. Obi-Wan was a master of defense, but even he could agree that he had much more to learn before he truly mastered defensive lightsaber usage. Obi-Wan swung his blade around and cut off one of Grievous's hands. Kenobi was able to cut off another one of Grievous's hands before Cody and the other clones rallied around Grievous and peppered him with blaster bolts. Grievous shrieked in pain as he whirled around trying to hit one of the clones with a lightsaber. This exposed Grievous enough for Kenobi to shove his lightsaber into Grievous's back, killing him instantly. Obi-Wan didn't check if the kill hit the mark, as he ran over to Anakin and got under him. Anakin was still alive. Barely. Anakin looked at Obi-Wan and apologized to him. He believed they could have saved Eth, but it was a trap. Obi-Wan told Anakin there was nothing for him to apologize for. Cody and the other clones gathered around Kenobi, removing their helmets in solidarity with the Jedi General. Skywalker grabbed a hold of Obi-Wan and said that Ahsoka needed to be trained. Obi-Wan told Anakin not to worry about her. She would be okay. Anakin smiled, and then, under his dying breath, he squeezed out a last message to Kenobi, simply telling his master that he loved him for everything that he did for him. Obi-Wan's eyes welted with tears as Anakin's eyes rolled back and his body became heavy. Obi-Wan held his former apprentice close to him. Obi-Wan felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Commander Cody. Obi-Wan slowly lowered Anakin's body to the ground, taking a deep breath while he did so. Obi-Wan asked if Master Koth or Gallia were still alive, to which they responded with an overwhelming no. Grievous may have been killed, but at what cost? Cody told his general that they needed to get out of the ship before it exploded. Obi-Wan grabbed Anakin's lightsaber and said goodbye to his student, before he ran to the door and cut the hole in the door so they could escape. The clones followed Obi-Wan back to the Arquentans as it released the boarding capsule and broke away from the flagship. Yularen and the rest of the Republic fleet ripped apart the Separatists and returned to hyperspace en route to Coruscant. Inside of Obi-Wan's ship, the Jedi General sat alone, in the middle of the hallway. He hadn't moved since they boarded the ship. 3 Jedi dead. The clone leader of the 501st dead, and his apprentice was one of those Jedi, dying in his arms in the same manner that Qui-Gon had. Obi-Wan held Anakin's lightsaber in his hand and questioned everything. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. The trip from Seleucami to Coruscant was long, extremely long. Obi-Wan knew. He just knew he had a lot of responsibility on his shoulders now. Being the only council member to survive the encounter with Grievous, he'd have to report to the council the deaths of Grievous, Koth, Aligadia, and Anakin Skywalker. A chill shot through his body. He'd also have to tell Padme and Ahsoka, too. Who would take control of the 501st? Would Ahsoka become his student? Obi-Wan didn't say a word until they arrived on Coruscant. Commander Cody informed Admiral Yularen of Anakin and Rex's death, considering he was the Admiral for the 501st. Obi-Wan would leave the ship immediately and go to Padme's residence. It was a late evening on Coruscant when they arrived. The Senator was in her residence doing her normal evening routine when she heard the sound of a Jedi speeder arriving at her landing bay. She came running around the corner excited to see Anakin, and then she saw Obi-Wan. She knew something was wrong, and so she asked Master Kenobi what happened. Obi-Wan held out Anakin's lightsaber and apologized. He told her he couldn't save him. Padme's eyes watered as she stepped forward. Obi-Wan told her that the lightsabers were not supposed to be given out, but as Obi-Wan expressed, He understood in his own way Anakin and Padme's bond. Obi-Wan told her that it was an unspoken secret. They both knew, Obi-Wan knew, but they both acted like he didn't. Obi-Wan walked forward, and instead of taking the lightsaber, Padme fell limp into Obi-Wan's arms. Obi-Wan told her how sorry he was, to which Padme told Obi-Wan she knew it wasn't his fault. She knew Obi-Wan would have done anything for Anakin. She believed the same was true here. No matter what happened at Slukamai, Padme knew that Obi-Wan would have done anything for Anakin, and believed that to be true. And it was true. The two embraced each other for a long while. Obi-Wan's repressed tears returned to his eyes. Padme not only needed this after hearing of the death of her husband, but she also knew that Obi-Wan needed it. He was a strong man, but she knew no one hugged him after his master died, and she knew that she would be the only one to hug him after Anakin's death. It was a sweet, simple gesture that Obi-Wan would never forget. The two would talk for a short bit until Obi-Wan would leave Padme's residence and call upon the Jedi Council. It was nighttime by this point, and the Jedi knew that Kenobi was coming back. Each of the council members had their own suspicions, but they had to wait until Kenobi got to the temple to find out what had happened. When Obi-Wan arrived, the council was gathered quietly. They all turned their heads as the sound of Obi-Wan's footsteps echoed throughout the council chambers. Obi-Wan walked to the middle of the room and turned to face Master Yoda and Master Windu. Obi-Wan began to speak as he choked on his words. He told the Jedi Masters that Koth, Adigalia, and he couldn't say his name. He just couldn't. He couldn't be the one to do it. He had to do it with Qui-Gon, and he just couldn't say the name Anakin Skywalker. The letter A sat at the edge of his tongue and didn't move. Nausea filled his stomach and his chest fell short each beat. He shook his head and sighed. Obi-Wan told the council that his apprentice, too, was killed. Obi-Wan looked at his peers, and tears sat in his eyes as the words that followed escaped him. The council members watched. It wasn't easy. It was very hard to see a man so strong, so courageous, so stoic, look and act so frail. It was against the Obi-Wan Kenobi that everyone knew. But he lost his brother, someone he'd raised since he was just a boy. Obi-Wan loved Anakin with all of his heart, and he was broken. Obi-Wan swallowed his words and then spat them back out again, gaining a slight bass in his voice as he told the council that he was able to kill General Grievous. He continued and informed them that he would be taking over Ahsoka's training from here on out, and that he would promote Sergeant Appo to commander of the 501st. The Jedi Council looked at Obi-Wan as he excused himself from the council chambers, walking back to the elevator and returning to the heart of the temple itself. Obi-Wan exited the elevator at the worst possible time, and the worst possible thing could have ever happened. He looked into the excited eyes of Ahsoka Tano. She jumped with joy, expressing that she was glad he and Master Skywalker returned. But before she could ask where Anakin was, she saw the loss in Obi-Wan's eyes and asked what happened. Obi-Wan asked her to walk with him. She nodded her head as Obi-Wan informed her that during their mission, Anakin and Master Gallia infiltrated the bridge of General Grievous' flagship, to which they were both killed in conflict with Grievous. Obi-Wan was able to defeat Grievous, but at what cost? Obi-Wan explained to Ahsoka that he was going to be taking a hold of her training. Ahsoka's heart was shattered. It's not that she didn't like Obi-Wan or she didn't want Obi-Wan, but it was the fact that she got along with Anakin. The two of them were different in their own unique way, and even Anakin was the one to say he didn't think she'd make it as Obi-Wan's Padawan. Obi-Wan also explained to Ahsoka that Rex had passed too, and she would be joining him and Commander Cody in the 212th. Commander Appo would be taking a hold of the 501st. Obi-Wan told Ahsoka that if he could do anything to make her and this transition easier, to please let him know. He knew Anakin better than any other Jedi, and he could certainly understand her and where she'd be coming from if she had problems or uncertainties about everything that had just happened. Obi-Wan couldn't leave his quarters for the next couple days. He actually wouldn't. He was excused from being in the council chambers, and the 212th wasn't being dispatched. Ahsoka was doing alright. She had Plo Koon to console her, but Obi-Wan was heartbroken to say the least. He shut himself away from everyone to process everything. But he couldn't sleep much, and when he did sleep, all that popped into his mind was the lifeless body of his student, his best friend, his brother. Anakin was too young and deserved so much more in Obi-Wan's mind. The day would finally come. The Jedi would bury their dead. Koth, Adigalia, and Anakin Skywalker would have their last resting place inside of the Jedi Temple. The ceremony would be the crux of pain for Obi-Wan, considering all of the bodies were disposed of inside of the explosion that took down Grievous' flagship. But the former robes of each of these Jedi were laid, in the caskets, and then they were buried, signifying the end of their lives and their movement into the Force itself. Considering the death of these Jedi happened so early in the war, it was a scary time for the Jedi. While Grievous may have been dead, thanks to Kenobi, the Separatists still loomed largely over the galaxy. Sidious, on the other hand, was extremely upset, pissed to say the least. He almost killed Dooku over the death of Skywalker, if it wasn't for the fact that he actually needed Dooku, because now there was no one to replace Dooku. Sure, there was Ventress, but she wasn't exactly what he wanted. She was powerful, a great duelist, but not exactly his type of apprentice. She was too unstable for his liking. Sidious decided that Dooku would have to suffice, and maybe a surviving Jedi would be sustainable or suitable as a Sith after the execution of Order 66. For Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, they would initially have some headbutting. Obi-Wan understood Ahsoka more than he did Anakin. The reason being is with Ahsoka, he had already dealt with a rebellious student, so he is able to handle it adequately without causing too much blowback. Ahsoka didn't take too well to Obi-Wan's teachings, not because of their difficulty, but because they were much more orthodox. Ahsoka afterwards did handle it really well, after some adjusting to Obi-Wan's rhetoric. Because Ahsoka became Obi-Wan's apprentice, she stayed tight with Kenobi, and traveled with him on several missions. As the war progressed, one of those missions would be going to Mandalore and protecting the Duchess of Mandalore. As the war carried on and got more intense, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan became an inseparable duo. Of course, they had to be around each other, but Obi-Wan mixed his treatment of Ahsoka with what he had learned from training Anakin, and he also mixed it with what he observed from how Anakin trained Ahsoka. Obi-Wan mixed both of these together, and Ahsoka actually thrived off of it. It was something truly beautiful. Midway through the war, Sidious would ask Dooku to assassinate Asajj Ventress, to which he would obey the orders, affirming to his master that he was still loyal to him. Through a series of events, this would bring Obi-Wan and Ahsoka back to Mandalore to free Satine. With backup, Obi-Wan and his prided new student would be able to help Satine escape Mandalore. Most of this was because the Twilight, Anakin's personal ship, was retired. Obi-Wan didn't want to mess it up, so he took a newer vessel, one that was able to escape from Mandalore. Maul wasn't killed in the process, but it would lead to the eventual invasion of Mandalore, which really went against what Satine wished for her home world. But she would be held safe on Coruscant while Ahsoka and her master led the siege of Mandalore, inevitably leading to the death of Maul and Savage before Sidious could bury his hands into his former student. Sidious wouldn't have brought Maul back as an apprentice, but he would have used him as a pawn in his game, something that would no longer be happening with his unfortunate death at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi again. With Ahsoka growing at a similar rate to which Anakin grew throughout his training, Obi-Wan would have faith in his apprentice's ability to hold her own against even the likes of Dooku, considering she helped him kill Savage and Maul. It would be very contested, but it would be functional. For Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, their bond developed very similarly to that of Anakin and Ahsoka. Though, whereas Ahsoka and Anakin were like brother and sister, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka were like father and daughter. Obi-Wan watched over her, but he also knew that she was completely functional by herself, without him. His trust for her was much more than his trust for Anakin at her age. Something that Ahsoka and Obi-Wan did really well was communicate with each other. Obi-Wan was an established master, and he worked with one of the most rambunctious, difficult students a master could ever ask for. Because of that experience, he was able to save both him and Ahsoka some time throughout their teachings. Ahsoka would never be accused of the temple bombing, something that fell down on Barrett Sophie through an unforeseen set of events led by Master Snube, Jedi Master in charge of investigative matters. And for Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, they would fill the hole in each other's hearts that they had from losing Anakin. As the war closed to an ending, the Chancellor would be captured by Dooku during the Battle of Coruscant, which would lead Windu and Saesee Tiin to infiltrate the Invisible Hand to rescue the Chancellor on a successful mission. Militaristically, the Battle of Coruscant was the last stand for the Separatists. Without Grievous as a general in their army, the Separatists had a lot of lackluster of power in their militaristic campaigns. Windu and Saesee would be able to defeat Dooku and bring him in for questioning on Coruscant. Sidious, on the other hand, wasn't finished with his plan, and as the Jedi cut down the droids across the galaxy, Palpatine felt his edge losing traction, and what better to do than to execute Order 66. While Obi-Wan and Ahsoka were not on Utapau, they were on a special mission, tracking down the Separatist leaders alone, which allowed them to escape the 212th and Commander Cody when Order 66 came down. While overall Order 66 would be effective, without the Jedi Council as far spread out in the Outer Rim, due to early war victories after Saleucami, the attack on the Jedi Temple would be left rather unsuccessful. The few Jedi Masters left would take their fight to Sidious himself, and they would be able to defeat him in a test of combat. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan were able to capture the Separatists on Mustafar, but without knowledge of Order 66, they would be completely cut off from their clone army. It would be a message sent out from the Jedi Temple that would inform them of the purge on the Jedi Order. It would be a sad time for them, but they would also leave a tracker for Commander Cody to find them at, of which they would actually just leave it with the Separatist leaders so that the clones could take them in. The Jedi would go into hiding. A case would be made for them in the Senate. With Palpatine dead, the Republic would question Dooku, and with the last 13 years of his life being wasted for absolutely nothing, he would admit to Palpatine's involvement in everything. With the conclusion of the Clone Wars and the graduation of Ahsoka from Padawan to Knight, Obi-Wan would begin to explore the possibilities of a hidden relationship with the Duchess of Mandalore. The Jedi would rebuild, and while it was very fortunate for them to succeed, it would lead to a new era of Republic peace, an era without the Sith, and an era of serenity and force. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan Pimp Daddy Bane, Icy Raptor, Apollo, Madman Studios, Anakin003, Gord, and Flynn Van Cease for supporting the channel. Hit that like this video. If you want to see what else, go to comments, crossovers, check out the Twitch community, Discord, and Patreon, support in other ways. For the free lightsaber, go down below. There's a dock. You click on the dock. You click on the dock. You write your name on the dock, and that's all you have to do. And let's talk about our story. So, yes, did the end of the story speed up? I'm going to address that first. Yes, it did. Reason that is because the story is involved with Obi-Wan and Anakin, or Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, sorry. And it's not going to follow anyone else. The story is centered around Obi-Wan, essentially. I know the story is titled about Anakin, but the story itself is more centered around Obi-Wan, which is why Obi-Wan is more mentioned than anything else. The rest of the galaxy still kind of happens, and Palpatine's plans kind of happen, but they don't really follow through. And I'm going to reiterate something I mentioned in a previous video. Anakin does not have to bring balance to the Force every video. It's repetitive, it's boring, you don't want to see that. It's boring. You don't want to see me do the same story all the time. That's why I always change it up. And it literally couldn't happen because Anakin is supposed to die in this story. So the story itself is like poetry, it just rhymes. And what I was kind of doing here is the tragedy of Obi-Wan's life. Obi-Wan has a very tragic life, and in canon he lost both Satine and Anakin. So with him taking on Ahsoka, I believe that he wouldn't lose Satine, but I'm still kind of contentious on that idea. It could go either way. But the poetry rhymes, what I'm talking about, the George Lucas quote, obviously, but the reference is to Anakin and Qui-Gon's death, kind of similar to Satine and Qui-Gon's death. It's that similarity between someone dying in his arms. And, I mean, Obi-Wan has a very tragic life, and with the title of the story already being told to you, with you knowing what the outcome of the story is going to be, I have to make it believable, okay? The title only makes sense if I say, what if Grievous killed Anakin? Not if, what if Grievous won the Battle of Slugamai? No one knows what I'm talking about. So, with that title, I have to make it believable. And what happens in the story, I really try and make believable, is that Anakin would get arrogant and then realize, oh, Grievous is actually a much better duelist than I had originally thought, and I'm a little over my head here. And I think the only way that Anakin would be killed is if he got trapped. And that's what happened. He got trapped, and he got killed because he got trapped. And that's what I had to do to make you believe it. And as for Obi-Wan, a lot of this came from inspiration for the Kenobi show. Now, I know I've gotten some backlash from you guys because I like things, and that's perfectly fine. I don't really care. But a lot of the inspiration for Obi-Wan here is from the show. It's from the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. And why is that? Because that show captures what happened to Obi-Wan when he lost Anakin. And I think what happened here is that similar thing where he kind of locks himself away. He just goes into hiding, essentially, in his room for a couple of days. And then because he has a responsibility to Ahsoka and the war is going on, he trains Ahsoka, which, I mean, having the original trilogy be written before the prequels, you can't really change that, so obviously that doesn't change. But with Ahsoka being an active member of the Jedi Council and the Jedi Order, having this moment is very important. This moment of Obi-Wan being like, oh, I have other responsibilities that I have to portray to, and it's something that Obi-Wan can't do in canon because the original trilogy has to happen. So a lot of the inspiration for Obi-Wan's behavior after Anakin's death came from the Kenobi show, because that's literally what, and yeah, okay, that's kind of self-explanatory, isn't it? Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the story. I know it's rather short, and I know it kind of jumped around a bit, but yeah, I hope you all enjoyed it. I do put a lot of effort into these stories, as short as this one might seem, and as fast as it kind of sped up after that main point. The main point I really wanted to convey is that, like, yes, I think Palpatine would have to get over it, essentially. Like, things would just have to get over it. And I think, very similarly to the last video, it's going to be kind of a draw. It's going to be like, the Jedi kind of win, but they kind of don't. Like, there's enough of them where they win, because Grievous is a militaristic dude. He's very important in the militaristic campaign for the Separatists. So if you take him out, the Separatists don't win as many battles. That's just because he was really aggressive. He's a really aggressive leader. So if you take Grievous out of the picture, then the Separatists probably lose some more. That assumption going in is that the Separatists wouldn't end up in the Outer Rim for the Outer Rim campaign or the Outer Rim sieges by the end of the Clone Wars, so the Jedi would be actually able to defend the temple. But it's all up to speculation. You know how it goes. Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.